In this video, I will show you how to cut the bird's mouths in the rafters and decorative end cuts on the beams and the rafters as well. So let's take a look first at the bird's mouth that should exist here between this rafter and this beam here. The easiest way to accomplish that is to utilize a feature inside of Revit called coping. And coping is when you cut an unusual, sometimes unusual shape where beams, in particular steel beams, come together like an I-beam or a W shape. Often they're sculpted and cut in a very elaborate way almost to allow the flange on that I-beam to nest into and amongst between the webs or the chords on the top and the bottom chords on the steel beam. So we can use that as well for wood beams as well. It's really simple to do. So all you have to do is go to your modify panel, and then the cope tool is just above the cut tool here on the geometry one. If you drop this down, you'll also notice there's the ability to remove coping as well. So let me just pause on that. Let's see if an image comes up just to show you the video for this. So here's a typical situation, and if you look at the video that's playing right now, you can see what typically happens is you have the ability to take a beam and cope it so that it cuts with a certain clearance to the other framing member. Then they could attach welded plates in the case of steel beams and bolt them together or weld them together, whatever it is they have to do. So in this case, though, we're going to use the coping tool to cut the bird's mouth in this rafter to this beam, and on this rafter as well to this beam up here. Really easy to do. All you do is you pick the cope tool. You'll notice multiple cut is selected here. So the next thing it's asking me to do here is to first select the element to be coped. So that's the element that's going to be cut. And I'm going to pick this rafter here. And then it's asking me to select the column or framing with which to cut. And I'm going to cut it with this beam here. And now you'll notice it actually cut a bird's mouth out of there. However, it's the wrong size to really work well for me. Don't worry about that for now. We're going to fix that in a moment. So now it's asking me for the next element to be cut. So I'm going to pick this one. 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 I'm going to just march all the way along here and pick all of these rafters to cut these. Okay. All right, so that worked out pretty well. I'm going to click out in the middle of nowhere here. And then I'm going to, again, go back to the tool and pick this beam to cut it. Cancel that. So I'm going to cancel that command and go back to the cope tool. So reselect the cope tool, pick this one, and then pick this one to cut it. And then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. So now you can see I have a strange looking bird's mouth at the top and a strange looking bird's mouth at the top, or at the top and at the bottom of this rafter for the coping. I could do the same thing on the other side, so let's go ahead and reselect the cope tool. I'll pick the front one here. I'll pick this one to cope it, and I'm just going to march along here very quickly and pick each one of these. Doesn't take very long. Restart the cope tool. Pick this front one again maybe, and then this one, and then pick each one of these. Did I get them all? I missed this one here, and I missed this one here, and this one here. Clicking too fast. So now you can see I have them all coped. However, we'll go back to our south elevation. You can clearly see that there's a problem here. They're coped too far apart, and that's because the coping tool is really designed primarily for steel frame conditions where you need to have a certain clearance to the other steel members so they don't bind or twist and cut each other or break each other in some way. So in this case, what I need to do is I need to adjust the coping distance. So all I have to do is pick all of these rafters. I'm just going to cross select through the bottom of them here. I'll hold down Control and cross through the bottom of these ones as well. And then if you look inside of the properties here, here is the coping distance. And I can adjust them all at the same time just by typing in 0, clicking Apply. And now you can see if I go back to my 3D view, I have a perfect coping bird's mouth here cut for each one of those rafters so it shows properly. Okay, really easy to do if you use the coping tool and select them in the right sequence. Just be aware that each coping operation could only occur with one beam, so I had to just restart the coping tool to do the top one. So just be aware that's going to require an additional operation there for each one. Okay. All right. So now let's take a look at putting a decorative cut on these beams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this a couple different ways. I'm going to use one technique for doing the cantilevered beams here and the top ridge beam, and then I'm going to use an entirely different approach for these. Be aware that you could use the secondary approach for all of these. I just want to show you a couple different ways of doing this. So to cut my beams for these ends here, it would be beneficial if I were to look at it in an orthogonal view. So I'm going to take a look at the west or east view. It doesn't matter. I'll work on this beam, so I want to go to the west view here. Only I'm going to double click here in the elevation. Here's my west view. Immediately you can see I've got a problem. Everything's in single line or stick diagram drawing, so I'm going to change this to a fine level of detail. Now I can see my beam here. That's the one I want to create a decorative cut on. And this decorative cut can be of many different shapes or forms. You can even use reference planes to cut with as well. So if I drew a diagonal reference plane here, I could actually cut it with that. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an opening. So I'm going to go to you can do it from the Structure tab or the Architecture tab, doesn't matter which one. And you'll notice in the opening tools here, there's an opening by face. It intentionally shows a little steel beam here. It's because this tool can be used when you want to put a hole in a beam, in the middle of a beam, to put piping through or a ductwork or something like that. Consult with your engineer. Never cut holes in beams without proper guidance and making certain you're not invalidating the integrity of the beam. So I'm going to select by face here. I'm going to move to the edge of this beam, and I'm going to make certain I can see a big rectangular plane here. What this is doing is it's picking the plane that the middle of the beam is drawn in. So I'm going to click on that. Now I'm in my sketch mode, so now I can go ahead and sketch something that I want to remove from this. You have to obey the rules of sketch mode. You have to make certain you don't have lines that overlap or gap or anything like that. I'm just going to go ahead and just pick the line tools here. And you can dimension this if you wanted to as you're working. I'm not going to bother doing that. I'm just going to sketch something freehand here. And let's do that. And I'll do this and go back to my line tool. And I'll do this and I'll do, whoops, back to my line tool I said. Here, maybe 2.5 down this way. And then I'm just simply bringing it back around the other way. And I'm going to trim this out like this. Okay? Now, what I've done here is I've created a closed area. It must be closed. It can extend outside the beam. You could, of course, just use the edge of the beam if you wanted to pick line for those. Doesn't really matter, just so long as it extends outside in some way. It must be closed too, so don't forget to add these two elements, and I like to extend it beyond there. And then what I can do is just click check, and it will give you an alert. Don't worry about this warning that you see down here. It's telling you that it partially cuts its host. That's not a problem. And then if I click outside here to make this warning go away, you can see I've just cut the end of this beam. So if I go to my 3D view, you can see, sure enough, if I orbit around to the other side so you can see it, that beam now has a decorative cut in it at the end. Okay, let's go back to the west view. Now that I have this decorative cut here, I might want to put it on this end of the beam. And that's not hard to do. All I have to do technically is take this cut and mirror it. So since this building is symmetrical, I know that this column here is the center of my building. I can actually select this opening, that's a separate object basically, use my pick axis mirror command tool, find the middle of this post, click there. Again, I'll get this message, and now you can see, if we look at this from a three-dimensional standpoint, you can see that beam is now cut on both sides. Pretty easy to do. I'll do it on the east side, only this time I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to go to the east side. Again, I need to go into fine level of detail view here. And now what I'm going to do is cheat a little bit. I'm going to actually borrow or trace, if you want to think of it that way, the lines from the other cuts onto this one. So I'm going to go over to my display modes, and I'm going to change this from hidden line into wireframe. Now I can see the lines back here very easily. So I'm going to again do the same thing, opening by face, make certain I pick this face, not this one, but this one. So make sure you get that big green rectangle. And then I'm going to say pick line, and now I can pick these lines that are way in the background on the other beam. In fact, I could even lock them if I wanted to. That way, if I went in there and edited that sketch on that opening, on that one, this one would automatically readjust to match it as well. And then I'll just draw a line out here, and then I'll trim those corners up like that, and click check. Again, don't worry about the warning. Anytime you get a warning in yellow like this, it says warning, you don't have to click the close button here. You can just click anywhere in a blank area and that warning will go away. That's how unimportant they are. I'm going to select this opening cut again, and I'm going to use my mirror by axis tool. Pick the center of this one since I know it's the center of my building, and I'll get this warning again. Don't worry about that. And you can see now that that beam has been cut at that end as well. So now you can see if I go here, you can clearly see that my beams have all been cut in both directions like that, and everything looks pretty good. Now I can cut this one the same way. Let's go back to the east elevation maybe. And here's where I might want to think about how long these beams are. I might want to extend it out to match that one maybe. So watch for your reference lines. If you want to do that way, that would be fine. I'm going to drag this in so I know it lines up with that beam nicely. And here's a situation where I want this one to come up here, but it's not in line with it, but that's okay. I can still do this pretty easily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead and use the same technique by face, pick this beam. I'm going to use the same technique. I'm going to use pick line. I'm just going to pick this one, this one, this one. I'm not locking it though. And then this one. And again, I will do the same thing where I have a line that continues across here. And whoops. Come on, Revit, what'd you do? There we go. And trim this one to this one, this one to this one. And now what I'm going to do is just cheat a little bit. I'm going to grab all of these and I'm going to move them from this endpoint on the beam here up to this endpoint here. Technically, I'm in that sketching plane. Even though I was borrowing the lines from the other one, I'm still in the beam plane itself that I was sketching in. So I know that's correct, so I can click check. Again, you'll get the warning. Don't worry about it. Pick this into the beam. Mirror once again. Pick the center of your post or the center of this rafter. It's laid out the same way. I could tab select if I wanted to and grab the center of that beam right there, or rafter. It would work just as well. And now you can see my beam has the same decorative cut at the top here. So that takes care of the decorative cuts on the beams, and it also takes care of the bird's mouths on the object as well. So if we look at this, it's starting to look pretty reasonably good for a building of some sort, or a pergola. So what if we want to put decorative cuts on here? That is a lot of sketching, isn't it? So here's a situation where we're going to venture outside of our project file for just a moment here in a moment. And I'll tell you that when you're working this way, sometimes it becomes important for you to think of more productive ways of working. So what I'm about to do is open up this rafter in what's called the family editor. And what that's going to allow me to do is to define the parameters that drive this particular family. In future assignments, we'll be looking at the family editor. But for now, it's just going to be a little baby step venture into the family editor. So I'm going to select this rafter here, and I'm going to say Edit Family. Now, this is going to open up a new environment for us here. This is specifically opening up the family editor, which is an editor that allows you to create families that are loadable into your Revit environment, your Revit projects. You'll notice these tools up here should look familiar to you. The standard creation tools, the extrusion, blend, revolve, sweep, swept blend, and voids as well. Their counterpoints is voids. And then this object here is actually a sweep, and it's basically using some dimensional information to drive the shape of this thing. These are the types. So whenever you create types by editing the type and duplicating it and creating a new type for something, you're actually making types. And this tells me what types are inside of this particular family right now. Well, I actually want to use a 2x8 rafter, so I'm going to say 2x8. Click Apply. So you'll notice my rafter changed its size a little bit here. I'm going to click OK, and you can see here the dimensional parameters for it, the thickness of the board and then the height of the board. I'm going to click OK. And now here in the project browser, you can see your directions for the views. So if I open up the views, you can see that there are floor plan views, there are ceiling plan views, 3D views, and elevations. I actually want to look at this thing from an elevation, and I can tell by looking at my view cube here, I want to look at it from the front. So I'm going to double click the front view. Here is that object. These are the reference planes that determine the location of the things like the connection point and the extensions on the beam when you create them. But what I really want to do in this case is I want to sketch a void on this end and on this end. So I'm going to go to my Create tool, select Void Extrusions, and I'm going to pick a plane by clicking OK, and I'm going to move over here and tab select until I can see I've selected the front face of this object. And now I'm going to go ahead and sketch. So I want my rafter tail to look a little bit like this maybe. Let's zoom in here. Let's make that 2 inches by 2 inches. I will grab this again, 45-degree line. I like that. Back to my line tool, back this way, and then down like this, and then over to here, and then up to here. And then I'll trim this again like that. And I'm going to click check to see what it looks like. There's my void. I could select the void here, and I can actually mirror it with this tool here. I'll go ahead and use the pick axis tool and grab it like that. So now you can see I've got this decorative intail on my rafters. Now, notice what I'm working on here. I'm actually working on the framing family dimensional lumber. This becomes a problem if I load this back into my project. If I were to load this into my project, it would replace every single 2x8 occurrence with this new decorative intail cut. So I don't want to do that. I want to be very careful about overriding and stepping on the toes of families that already live in my project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a new type of family. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, Family. I could put it in the Revit folder. It's not the best idea. I would actually probably put it in a project folder, but I'm just going to leave it here for purposes of expedition here. And I'm going to call it Pergola Rafters. Okay. And now I can go ahead and load this into my project. So I'm going to say load and close it. I don't want to keep this open anymore, so I'm just going to say load and close this file. So it is now loaded into my project, and you'll notice in the preview here you can see the decorative cuts on here. If I were to actually draw a rafter here and then look at it in 3D view, you can clearly see that this rafter, even if I make it longer, now has decorative cuts on the end. Oops, that's the wrong size. I should have done 2x8 here. There we go, 2x8. Oops, I want the Pergola 2x8. Where'd you go? There you are. Okay, so that's what I expect to see. Notice that, by the way, that when I change this to a 2x10, these numbers or the distances change because I designed that particular cutout to work only with the 2x8, and I didn't constrain it with dimensions or parameters or anything like that. And you could do that with your sketches when you make voids and things. You can constrain them with parameters and things. So I'm going to go ahead and make certain that that is a 2x8. And now what I want to do is I want to replace all of these with these to put decorative end cuts on all of these very quickly. Now keep in mind when I made these actually extend up here higher, right? So there's actually a decorative end cut up here, but the reference plane that we used to cut these removed that decorative tail at that end of it. So you don't want to do it for each one. You actually want to go into the beam system. So I'm going to select my beam system here. And then here you can see the beam type is dimensional lumber. I'm going to drop this down and tell it to use my 2x8 pergola rafter. And now you can see, lo and behold, I have a decorative end cut on every single one of those. I'll do the same thing for this one and change that to pergola rafters 2x8. And again, a decorative end cut on every single one of those. So that's probably a better way of working, I think. And we could have done the very same thing on these. We could have made a new beam family called pergola beams or decorative end cut beams or something, and then that would have taken care of that. Now, there are some other things you probably want to do in here as well. So you probably actually want to put blocking between each one of these. In the real world, you'd have blocking here between the rafters. And you can actually take a piece of wood, a blocking element, and actually cut it, bevel the top of it very easily inside of Revit by using a reference plane. So if you actually put a piece of lumber inside here from this face to this face, the inside face of these two rafters, you could use a reference plane or another element to cut it. So just be aware that's something you can do. In this case, I'm not going to do that. And I think then if I turn on my roof, I think that pretty much takes care of everything I think I wanted to show you for creating this particular project. So let me go ahead and unhide this in view, the element. Let's go back to regular visibility here, and now you can see there is the assignment. The only thing that's missing really to make it complete would be some kind of a foundation system or floor if you wanted to put a foundation system in. And then of course I've given you the option of dressing it up with entourage and people and things as well. We will be utilizing this particular file in a future project, so it would be beneficial for you to finish this one so that you can use it later. We will be linking it into a site plan project in the near future. I hope that answers all of your questions about how to build the pergola. If you have any questions, you know how to see me during my office time. And I hope to see you guys soon. Stay safe and have fun with Revit.